Welcome back to A Celtic State of Mind. I'm Paul John Dykes, and this Thursday afternoon I am delighted to be joined by John Paul Mason. And John Paul, what a night last night. I don't care about all this dead rubber nonsense. I don't subscribe to it. I think the celebrations after the game last night showed that the players and the fans didn't subscribe to it either, did they? Is there such a thing as a dead rubber when it comes to Celtic? You want us to go out there and win the game, but with it came a lot, I think, of pluses as well. I'm going to say this, the tagline is, how Champions League breakthrough can galvanise the side. Is it a turning point?
We needed it after the weekend, and before we came on air there, I said this would have been a different show if we'd done it yesterday ahead of last night, or even Monday or Tuesday or whatever, because just there was a bit of a... I think there was a definite overreaction, because people have to remember that we lost at St Mirren under Ange Postecoglou. That was last season, right? That was last season.
It seems like a long time ago. I think it was like last September.
Yeah. And that was one of these results that was just out of nowhere. I wouldn't say we were maybe beaten in the same way as we were on Sunday, because the second half was really, really disappointing. There's no getting away from that. But these results happen. Were we going to do another invincible season? I don't know if people were thinking like that, but I certainly wasn't. You know that you can get beaten any game, as we did in the Cup against Kilmarnock. But for once, a European game has provided a bit of spark to the domestic season, probably right at the time that we needed it. I mean, obviously, everybody would have loved to have qualified for the Europa League or better, getting into the last 16 or whatever, but that wasn't to be this season. It is still progress, getting 4 points rather than 2, and this result and just the mood of the mood of the place last night, leaving Celtic Park, especially having conceded such a late equaliser, you're thinking they're going to go on and score. Seen this film before. Have we got it in us to get a winner? And an unlikely source pops up and gives us it, and suddenly that hoodoo. I mean, I can't believe it's been 10 years since a home victory and 6 years since any victory, and it was quite amazing to sort of scroll back on my phone and my videos and my pictures and go back and see the Anderlecht footage that I took, because I was in the home end that night. I couldn't get an away end ticket, so I was in the home end. So I've got a video from a distance of the Celtic fans at the end of the game all singing "This is the day that we win away," and that's the last time we won in the Champions League 6 years ago. Which it's weird that it's under Brendan. It was under Brendan Rodgers as well. So I think for everybody involved, the players who took a bit of a bashing after Sunday, and rightly so. At least Callum McGregor came out and said, "Look, we'll take the criticism when it's deserved," because sometimes you feel a bit kind of like, you get the sort of scattergun out a little bit, and I tried to sort of hold my fire a little bit on players, because I just think the players have always got an ability to make you look stupid. And there was people writing off Liam Scales again after Sunday, and then he gets man of the match last night, and you're like, right, where are you sitting in the Liam Scales debate then? If you don't want him, if you don't want him in the team, then without him last night, I don't think we're winning that game without his contribution. And special mention to Stephen Welsh as well. A lot of people's eyes would have popped at seeing his name on the team sheet, mine included. I was like, whoa, where's he come from? He's not played any. I was saying to the guy that sits in front of me, Mark, we were talking about how you need to be so mentally attuned to a game of that pressure, that importance, and he's not had any of that in any recent time. And when was the last time he played? Was it Aberdeen?
Well, let me think here. I don't think he's played a competitive game. I'd need to check. I know that he played a game in August, but I was thinking it was maybe one of the friendlies, JP.
I thought he played it for Dodgy.
I'll double check that as we go through. But yeah, you're right. To be thrown in cold, because there's fitness, you're ready to play, you're fit to play. And then there's that match sharpness, isn't there? That it takes a few games to actually attain. Normally you come off the bench, you maybe get 20, 30 minutes, and that's part of your reintroduction into the side. So yeah, what I would say to anybody, if you're into the old socials, if you check on X, every single time we do the pre-match, JP, I use the Celtic lineup that the club puts out there. I use that graphic, and I basically just say, what do you reckon of the starting 11? That's the point of discussion before a game, right? Half an hour before the game. You should see some of the replies. Unbelievable. I mean, they were going tonto at Stephen Welsh, Mikey Johnston, the whole shebang. And I think what we need to do is we need to go through this team because I think there was quite a few guys that really, really stepped up. Liam Scales being one of them. I thought Callum McGregor played a brilliant captain's role. O'Reilly, we'll talk about our favourite Celtic player, Big Heart. He's had a bit of stick this season. I thought he was outstanding last night. Alistair Johnston, an absolute warrior last night as well. So I think people stepped up, and that's where I get the galvanise. This galvanisation. There's certain things in adversity often, JP. What you'll find with a group of players, athletes, sports people, is that it brings them together. I'm going to use an example here, and it's obviously not an exact science, but I remember we spoke to quite a few of the guys from the Wim Jansen season, which is appropriate after last night's tribute to Wim Jansen, who obviously was involved with both clubs, winning a European Cup for Feyenoord. And I spoke to quite a lot of the guys from that team over the years, and they speak about that incident on a training pitch at Barrowfield, where Tosh McKinley and Henrik Larsson fall out, and it results in Tosh McKinley sticking the head in Henrik and breaking his nose. So the top player, the talisman, and you decide to stick the noggin in him. But strangely enough, and Simon Donnelly talks about this, he says that it was like almost a clear the air moment, a turning point in the season. He said so often what happens is people look at performances. JP and a few of the guys have said that the game against Liverpool or the fixtures against Liverpool proved to us that we were a team. We could actually do something. Some people point towards the Dundee United League Cup final. Yeah, we're winners. We've just won a trophy. And some point to the 2-0 game against Rangers, New Year's Day game. But other moments can also do that, and they can galvanise a team. And I've always found that pretty strange. Breaking Henrik Larsson's nose galvanised the team, and they went on and they won the league. Last night, people were calling it a dead rubber. You had pundits from down south. Yeah, we had a dig back at Jason Cundy last night. Pundits from down south, using Celtic's name as if we were just, for me, like the dregs, cannon fodder in Champions League. I remember a discussion earlier this season, JP, probably on the same channel, about how Celtic, should they be allowed to play in the Champions League? That was a kind of narrative we were getting. So there's a personal pride in that, because when you look at where we are in the global food chain when it comes to football, I mean, that win last night, not quite, but that win last night almost makes you the same amount of money as you make for winning the Scottish League. That one win in the Champions League. And then you look at the net spend of Celtic over the last 5 seasons against the likes of Man United, for example, and it shows you where you are in the food chain. And I think my frustration going into the game was, all that aside, I just didn't think we were maximising our spend. We were spending smart enough. We were bringing in enough quality. There's that word again. It's been used almost as much as dead rubber in the last week. And we go out there last night and we win the game. We go out there and we win the game. I felt there was a bit of freedom last night. It was almost as if the shackles were off, JP. Did you get a sense of that?
I did, and I guess I arrived just as the teams were coming out of the tunnel, so I missed the Wim Jansen tribute, which I'm a bit annoyed about. I would have liked to have seen that. If you could, I wonder if in the stadium you could even hear it if there was audio, because sometimes the audio is really bad in there. I don't know if they've tidied that up at all. But so I arrived, and obviously I saw the Feyenoord support, and I was immediately impressed. I mean, I had seen a video in the pub beforehand of them walking through the Merchant City, so I knew they were there in numbers. And I said to my pal Chris, I said, I think that's the biggest away support I've ever seen at Celtic Park. And he was like, nah, it's not that big. And I went, I think it might be. And then all of a sudden you realise that there's pockets of Feyenoord fans in the Celtic end, which, to my memory, and people might older than me or whatever might say that that's happened before. I can't remember seeing that happen before. I mean, there was on the halfway line in the North Stand, there was 20 of them or so there, all grouped together, above me in the north stand lower, like at 102. So whatever the number is up there, a pocket of them there. And there was constantly people sort of turning round and looking and everything else. And obviously the Feyenoord fans were making a racket and all that. I was just concentrating on the game. We've won the Singing Champions Cup many times. We've won the Singing Champions Cup and got beat in games.
Yeah.
We've done all that. Last night was about winning that game. And I was trying my best not to get distracted by all the stuff that was going on around me. And going back to your point about the shackles being off, I think it felt like that. I think the players weirdly were able to play without that pressure. And it also made me think that had we got a penalty in Rotterdam in the first half and gone in 1-0 up like we did last night, I'm almost certain that this group campaign would be completely different. Parallel universe and all that, copyright Kev Graham. But I genuinely think that it would have gone differently. I'm not saying we would have topped the group or anything crazy like that, but I just think, given how not great that Lazio side was, going into that game against Lazio at home, that was like the must-win game. There was so much pressure on the players, and you've got the weight of history, you've got the weight of not winning at home, and then last night it was taken away from them, and they won the game, and they've got that monkey off their back. And I just hope that for the players that are there, and hopefully they all want to stay. I mean, some of them won't have a choice in that, and that's fair, that's fine. But the players that the manager wants to stay, I just hope that winning that last night gives them the hunger and the appetite to go, right, game one on Saturday, give everything in that game and everything in every game from now to the end of the season, because we do that, then you'll end up back on that stage and you'll end up being able to perform on that stage again. And it guarantees you if you do well domestically, because there's no doubt about it from Brendan Rodgers' post-match at St Johnstone that he's of the opinion that some players maybe think they just need to turn up and get a win in Perth, or turn up and get a win at Rugby Park. But we were completely outfought in that second half, and we'll get more of that because teams will think, well, they don't like being roughed up, they don't like being gone at like Kilmarnock did, so they need to be prepared to fight to win this title. And at the end of the game, or half time last night, I said to Mark in front of me, I said, in order to win this game, we're going to need to come off this park absolutely knackered. Like, you're going to need to see players that have put in a shift. If we're going to protect this 1-0, or obviously it changed and went to 2-1, but if we're going to get that, then we're going to need everybody, having completely been spent at the end of it. And I think by and large that was the case, because Feyenoord are a good team. I don't think they're an amazing team, but they cut through us sometimes like we weren't there. The Joe Hart save, I thought that was a certain goal. The big one in the first half, where the boy just goes through and you're like, oh no, here we go. Classic Celtic goal conceded in Europe, which we ended up doing anyway with the back post goal that the guy scored. But
was that the one from Jimenez? He's some player.
Yeah, just when he broke through and he was 1-on-1, and Hart just had to choose the right way and get a strong hand in it, and he did. And I go back to, I remember the start of this campaign, there was a guy on YouTube who was saying that Joe Hart had to go, we've made a big mistake, and my defence of Joe Hart was pathetic and everything else, and cringeworthy and other words that he used. And I said to him, right, well, we'll see at the end of the campaign. If Joe Hart is at fault for us being out of Europe at the end of the campaign, then I'll acknowledge that. I'm sorry, but if anybody's sitting there saying that Joe Hart is to blame for us being out of Europe at this point in time, then you're looking to prove yourself right at that point, because I don't think he's been culpable. We got hammered in Madrid because we lost a man. I don't think if we'd had Manuel Neuer in goal, I don't think it would have mattered. Madrid were on fire that night. They sensed blood, and they murdered us. And they'll do that to teams. That's why they won the top of. That's why they're top of the group and they've not lost a game.
Ruthless. The thing is, JP, right on that point, just saying something. For me, if you're just saying something and you're in conversation, you're in the boozer, you're on a supporters bus, whatever it is, generally speaking, somebody's going to challenge you. But the nuances they try to do that online are pretty difficult, right? Because it's typing, it's a back and a forth and all this kind of stuff. So I think people have a perception, they'll stick to it, they'll die on a hill for it and all this kind of stuff. But with regards to some comments I've made this week, a massive discussion point has been recruitment. Of course it has. And we're just going into January and we're hoping again to bring in this quality that Brendan Rodgers has been speaking about. And my point was that a treble winning side should not go out and have to buy 9 players. Now, the justification for that comment then follows, JP, but once somebody sees that comment, they think I'm being critical of Celtic Football Club and I'm being anti-Celtic and all this. Absolutely not. I think bringing 9 players into a squad can actually have the opposite effect if the players are not of a quality standard. Actually, even if they were, if they're not the right mentality and they don't fit into the side, we've seen it. You know, overnight, if you bring in too many new bodies, it can seriously affect the momentum, the morale, the mentality, all this kind of stuff in a dressing room. And I think at that stage, especially with a vast squad that we have and we had, it's all about just tinkering with that, replacing quality with quality, adding a bit of quality where you can, and then building it on it from there. And if every so often you get presented with someone who you think can turn into a Matt O'Reilly or a Rio Atati, then you take that plunge and that's a development stroke project player. So that was my point there with the 9. And I think all these months later, coming into the middle of December, those players, some of them have settled, some of them haven't. Some have made a positive impact and some haven't. And going into that game last night, Lagerbielke's Celtic career could almost be bookended by the 2 fixtures against Feyenoord. So we go over there, and I'm never overly confident going into the Champions League, JP, because you know that you're playing high standard, right?
I've just thought of the whole redemption arc of Lagerbielke.
Yeah.
I didn't even think about the fact that he was the one that got sent off and for the penalty, and then he scored. That's something I honestly hadn't even clicked about that.
Yeah.
That's
the Lagerbielke redemption. I'll tell you what, credit to whoever had Born Slippy at the end of their finger for that goal going in. I mean, who had money on Lagerbielke scoring the winner? Nobody, right? Nobody. Shows your slips if you did. And the betting slips, that is. And obviously they play that song and it's like it washes away the doubt that probably he's had since he came to the club. A lot of fans have had. We've spoken about him loads on here. Young James McKenzie rates him. He's spoken about him always in a positive way on a Celtic State of Mind and on the blog as well. But there was doubts, JP, about was he a Brendan Rodgers signing? How come he's not getting a game? How come we're playing Nat Phillips in front of him? Is there something in Nat Phillips' deal that means he always has to be in the Champions League squad, etc., etc., etc.? Because as football fans, you ask the question. You think, why is he not playing? Well, he did play last night. And even when he was standing there waiting to come on, I was a bit surprised. Not that Welsh had to come off. You expect that, like we spoke about. He's not played. But for him to get the nod, I thought, right, here we go then. Because apparently the guy's got no pace. Apparently his passing range is wrong for the style of football that Celtic play. It's got to be short range passing. You don't break the lines, you don't hit the wingers, even though the likes of Scales is really, really good at that. And he comes on and he scores that winning goal. And like you say, the redemption, and you could almost gauge the whole performance of Celtic in this European campaign, because I'm now looking at it as a campaign now that it's ended. And you go over to Rotterdam, pot 1 team, Dutch champions, away from home, 2 sending off. You've got no chance, JP. I would have expected a capitulation that night rather than just with the 1 sending off. At least you've still got a fighting chance. The Atletico Madrid, you're going away from home again, quality side, and you get a sending off. And the whole thing just crumbles in the second half. Lazio, again, if you watch the game back, JP, up to the last 10 minutes, we're going toe-to-toe. I was calling it a mature performance in Europe. They bring on that added quality and Immobile, and he does the damage. And we don't have that wee spark there. So the 3 away games, hugely disappointing. But the one absolute write-off is Atletico Madrid from this campaign. You then look at the home games. 2-2 against a brilliant Atletico Madrid side where we're leading. There's a tactical change in the second half to shore it up. And you come away from that game thinking, wow, we played like a European side there, JP. We knew when to make the chances.
Which is conveniently forgotten about by a lot of people, by the way.
Yeah.
Or just seem to be brushed to one side as if it didn't matter, or because we didn't win. You know, I find that astonishing that people have conveniently shelved that. I mean, not just fans of our club, but fans of, you know, Scottish football fans in general, who slag us for our performances in Europe and everything else. The fact that we went toe to toe with the team that ran away with the group, I mean, that was up there with the Celtic games of my early years going as a season ticket holder, and like under Martin O'Neill, we were by far a match for that team that night, and they knew it. They said it. They said as much. I'm pretty sure Simeone said that Celtic's press was the most troublesome that they faced in the games up until last night, anyway. But see, going back to Rotterdam away, I mean, last night it was tough with their fans singing. But you know what it's like being an away fan and away ground. I've been there many times and outsang the home support, and then came away with no points, and just came away with it. Oh well, my throat's hoarse, and I've had a good time.
My throat's hoarse, and I've got a half and half scarf.
Aye, my throat's hoarse, and I've had a good time at an away ground that I've never been to before. But ultimately, we've been beat. But that first half in Rotterdam, their fans were not loud in that stadium at all. I mean, it was like somebody had flicked a switch, like Marty McFly in Back to the Future, where he strums the guitar in front of the speaker. That was what their goal was like, their celebrations, because they'd been pretty quiet most of that half, and they were giving it loudly last night, slagging us and saying we were a rubbish support and everything else. And I mean, without the Green Brigade, whether you like them or not, the support right now in the main are so used to being led by the choir.
It's natural.
It's not something that you can just change. I mean, people were trying to do it last night, but if you've become accustomed to a way of being at a game, and that's what you've experienced as a Celtic supporter for the last 10, 15 years, and you've been led by that, then you're constantly looking to the left or looking to find when the songs are going to start. And I think obviously over time, if the Green Brigade weren't to come back, I think over time Celtic Park would find its rhythm again and find its voice. But I don't see the need to wait to do that if you have a ready and willing group that are there to do it. And I just really, really hope that the differences are put to one side, because it seems almost childish now that there's not that this impasse continues, that we're hamstringing ourselves. Last night should have been completely and utterly rocking, right? And it wasn't. It was obviously amazing when we scored the winner and everything else, but you know, there was not that level. I know that there's levels above last night in terms of volume of fan and everything else, and it's achievable when you've got all your weaponry in place, and we didn't last night. But I accepted that very early on. I was just like, I just want to win this game. Don't care about the singing. I don't care about that tonight. Tonight is about getting a result, and I'm just so glad we did.
Without a doubt. I mean, it's natural again, JP, I think, to after a massive element like that, it's taken out the crowd. There's a period of acclimatisation. Eventually the Celtic support would realise. But I don't want to be in that position either, JP. I do think that it's disjointed. There's been issues on the park that you're hoping Brennan's working through. Part of that's going to be recruitment in January. And then there's issues off the park. And the relationship between club and fan. And yeah, it's a group of fans. It's not all fans. I get it. It's a group of fans. But they do, they do, for me, put a lot into the atmosphere, particularly on the big nights. But even in, the run-of-the-mill games, if there is such a thing, JP, there'd be no singing. The place is quiet. It can be a bit of a morgue at times. And they injected that colour, that noise, the pyros, the whole thing. I think the flags, Champions League night, the tifos, that was all part of the experience. And I don't mean experience in that it's a tourist attraction. I mean experience like it can actually add to the energy of the night. I've been watching back the Barcelona game for 2012 for a completely different reason. And you're looking at what the fans give you, the energy that they actually give the team is there for all to see. I've spoken to a lot of people who were involved in the pandemic season, others who've been involved with Celtic, who say, you rest assured the fans not being there was an element. It was an element of the poor performances. Sometimes it benefited other teams, but it definitely doesn't benefit Celtic not having the fans there. I'm going to bring up a few of these comments. Let me know what you think about them. JP, I'm going to start with Joe Hart, because Joe Hart, at one point, probably at the end of the last season, I think, I was asked a question about Joe Hart, and I said, pound for pound, he's been the best signing under Ange Postecoglou. Now, by the way, he had a few bargains in his time. I'm probably going to change my view on that and say that it's Matt O'Reilly. But I mean, Matt O'Reilly, Joe Hart, Rio Atati, £4 million for the three of them. Unbelievable business, right? And for 2 seasons, I felt that Joe Hart gave us the leadership, the experience. He was another captain on the park, wasn't he? I felt for the first 2 seasons. This season, new gaffer comes in, changes the way that we approach the ball playing round the back, particularly between the 2 centre-halves and the goalie. And Hart has come in for a lot of stick. The criticism I've probably levied at him more often than not, JP, is the lack of commanding the area. I think sometimes that there's a lack of command within the 6-yard box. That's his domain. He needs to own it. Last night, I thought he was brilliant. It was Joe Hart, the goalie, making saves, big saves. I mean, let's rewind to McDermott Park, the game you spoke about. If Joe Hart doesn't make that save, it's a 2 each. And we're in even deeper trouble. That's a 2 each. You're not coming back from that. He makes the save, we break away, we score the 3rd goal, everybody's happy. But Joe Hart's had moments like that. And there's another word Brendan Rodgers has started to use when talking about Europe this season. Moments, JP. The moment that made the slightest of connections with that ball before it reached Palma against Lazio. These are just moments that everything can change in a split second, and the margins are so fine that you might not come back for it. But last night, for me, Joe Hart was brilliant. I'm not saying we don't need another goalkeeper, because we do.
Oh, neither am I. I'm not saying that either, but I don't think that we should be absolutely lambasting Joe Hart while he's still the goalkeeper, you know?
Yeah. No, definitely. I mean, I've seen a few things this morning. Obviously, we're getting into silly season with transfers. We've been linked with a left back. I'm not surprised at that. We've been linked with. I've seen a few people throwing Schmeichel's name into the mix as well. You'll remember his dad. That's when you know you're getting old, JP. When players that we watched back in the 90s, their sons are playing. That's when you know you're getting old. But yeah, we do need to strengthen it. I don't think, though. Let me know what you think in the comments. I don't think it's going to be a priority in January. Goalkeeper.
Nah, I don't either. I mean, unless it's going out and spending big with a view to that person playing as of the summer and that Joe Hart's contract doesn't get renewed. But I mean, the Ben Siegrist conundrum is quite surreal. I was listening to the BBC Sport coverage of the game last night, this morning, and they briefly mentioned Ben Siegrist and just sort of said he was a good keeper for Dundee United. It's not as I mean, it seems to be that he's come now, and because he's not done anything with Celtic, his rating seems to have gone down and down and down. He's probably gone from maybe an 8 out of 10 in terms of Scottish League to now being thought of as like a 5 or a 6. Mm-hmm. And I don't necessarily think that's true, but there must be some reason why he's not been in the picture and been completely out of it at some points, where the fact that Scott Bain's come in, there's no explanation given for Scott Bain playing instead of Ben Siegrist. We were never told he was injured that I know of. We were never told there was personal issues. It was just a case of this guy's not involved, which is a bit weird, really, because I mean, I always thought he was a good keeper whenever he played against us. And I saw him coming in as being a decent backup. I didn't ever think that he was going to become the number one, but I certainly didn't think that he was somebody that couldn't be relied upon to be backup, and that's been the case. So, no, I'm pretty sure our focus will be elsewhere in the park in January, and also getting players out, because there's too many. There's far too many players. The manager said as much. It's not as if it's just our opinion. It's obviously his opinion as well. So
yeah, without a doubt. I mean, we're sitting at 32. Bernardo's obviously here till the end of the season, but Nat Phillips is probably expected to go back to Liverpool, JP. So it goes down to 31. But then Idiguchi comes back in January, so it's back up at 32. We're talking about quality players. How many are we going to be, really, realistically, how many are we going to be bringing in January? Let's say we even bring in 3, and I don't think we will, but let's say we bring in 3. Takes you up to 35. 35 players, plus quite a few out on loan, by the way. And at that point, you're thinking, right, you could effectively shell out 10, you could get rid of 10 players, and it wouldn't make a blind bit of difference to the match day squad. You have 10 players. It's unbelievable when you consider they could be on 8 grand, 10, 15 grand a week, over a piece. That's hemorrhaging money every single week. So, yeah, loads of business to be done in January. Mikey boy, I think Hart did really well last night, but in my opinion, those kind of performances are becoming a rarity as he has been poor most of the season. We have to replace him. Love the lad low. I think we need to bring somebody in because, for example, if we went into that game last night, JP, I always think of this, the big games, the European games, cup finals, semi-finals, Rangers games, and you get an injury. Are you happy with the backup? And I look at Bain and I look at Siegrist. Siegrist has played 2 games of football since he signed for Celtic. 2 games, 2 League Cups. And Bain, in the same period, has probably played the same amount of games for Celtic. I remember he was in goals for the Easter Road game. Remember the 4-2 game last season. So I'm not confident with any of the 2. And I don't think they challenge Joe Hart. And that's no good because we're only human and complacency can creep in if you're not being challenged. If your jersey is yours every single week. Greg Taylor's played every game this season. There's been no challenge to his jersey whatsoever. I'm not saying that's the reason that he's not had as good a season this campaign, JP, but complacency creeps in. You need somebody breathing down your neck. And I always find it interesting when Stephen MacGowan links us to a player because you often feel, well, there's a decent source, JP. He's a credible source, and he has linked us to Thiago Araujo. And by the way, that's not for the first time that he's been linked to Celtic, and that again is a left back. Wouldn't surprise me if we were in for him. I'm just going to bring that up here because when we were linked to him in the summer, there was a number of clubs in for the player, and he didn't get his move. And apparently Steve MacGowan has suggested live on PLZ that we will be back in for him. Let me just double check him actually because I'm going to look at his profile and his age, etc., and I'll come back to you on that. But Bernabe obviously would need to leave. Do you bring a left back in, JP, before Bernabe's out? Or do you because again, the board's going to be saying, well, we're kind of top heavy on left backs. Why would we bring another one in?
Well, they signed Bernabe, didn't they? I mean, I don't know who put their name against Bernabe's signing because that has to be questioned. Like you said in a previous show, why are we going out and signing a guy who's smaller in stature than the guy that we've got to play in a position where arguably you need a bit more height when you're playing in defence? So I'm not saying that every left back or every right back has to be of a certain size, and if you're below that size, you're no good. But it's good to have the option, to play with. Against a particular team, for example, is there a team is there a game that's coming up that Greg Taylor would be better suited to, and is there a game that would be coming up that having a bigger, more robust left back would be better suited to? We've not got that choice at the moment, and for whatever reason, Bernabe is so far out of the picture, and it's just so frustrating as a fan who obviously puts in a minimal amount of money into the club, nothing spectacular, but to see any money getting wasted at the club that you support is really frustrating. You just want every penny to count and go towards making the team and the club better, and that's not what's happened for a long time, and obviously there's many examples of it happening, but there's far too many examples of it not happening.
The thing is, so you're talking about the amount of money that you put in terms of the percentage of your disposable income. It's huge. It's a huge amount. I mean, I know that you get people who do hospitality, for example, JP, and it's all through their business, and they are basically sealing deals and all that kind of stuff, and it's all written off in that respect. It's an expense and all that. But as a football fan, a working class punter, the money you actually invest in your football team is a huge percentage of your income and of your disposable income. Bernabe is something that's not worked very much in the same category as Siegrist. you try and find a club. It's going to be difficult to offload him and get your money back. That's for sure. It need to be like Klamala levels, because I couldn't believe that we got our money back for him. 3.75 million we paid for Bernaby. I think when we were first.
The mad thing is, Klamala is an example of somebody that can. Klamala's not just disappeared into the football abyss. He's had a decent career since he's left Celtic and probably earned decent money. It's not as if he just had this, amazing moment getting a deal at Celtic, getting a decent contract, and then he's gone elsewhere and fell off a cliff. He's played in New York. He's played in, I think he's questionably played in Israel, and he's back in Poland now. So, I mean, he's not by any means a failure in football terms. It just wasn't right for him at Celtic.
No,
he was, maybe another time and under another manager, he might have done better. I don't know. I don't know if he was ever good enough to play for Celtic or what. But Bernaby could quite easily go somewhere else after Celtic and have a decent football career. And he might not necessarily be a bad player. It's just like sometimes you're the wrong actor in the wrong film.
And you're not going to get a dozen games. You're not going to get a dozen games, first team games for Celtic to prove yourself. You've got to hit the ground running. That's the big thing as well, JP. It's like Liam Scales would have been out the door. Mm-hmm. Had we not been backed into a corner with regards to the injury crisis that we had at the beginning of the season, Liam Scales wouldn't be part of the discussion. And I think at some point today we will talk about him, because he was a titan last night. He was absolutely brilliant. He was a colossus last night. Patrick Klamala, as you quite rightly say, he's playing his football back in Poland at the moment, having been sold to New York Red Bulls, and then he had a spell at Hapoel Beersheva, a team that Celtic have played in Europe in the not too distant past. Thiago, I'm wondering about Thiago Araujo, because he was with Benfica. We've obviously done a bit of dealings and a bit of business with Benfica, both with the Jota deals and with Bernardo. And when we were interested in him first time round, he ended up going to Estoril. So that's where he's playing his football just now. And he can play left back, he can play left wing, and he's a 22-year-old as well. So you can tell that he's of that kind of age category that Celtic would be interested in. And one thing sprung to my mind, JP, you're talking about pockets of away fans in the home end. I do remember that at Murrayfield. Remember the game at Murrayfield where we were playing Legia Warsaw? Yeah. And I remember there being a wee bit of needle within this when the goals were going in. Obviously, there was a few cheers and then there was a few arguments, etc. And it was quite unusual at that time. It was unusual that we were playing the game at Murrayfield. Another thing I was going to mention, again, what if and all that kind of stuff. But we're talking about players that can play full back, left back. You've got a guy there in Aaron Hickey we could have signed, JP. We could have signed him for Hearts. And the thing is, with him, I know that sometimes it's the move that makes the player. So he might not have developed the way that he has developed since he went to Italy and then come back to England. I get it. But there's a whole host of the guys that you think, well, is there a snobbery? Why are we not shopping, in our own backyard when the player is there? Why not? Because a few of them have proved, going to Italy, for example, that they are decent footballers. So overall, before we actually get into the nuts and bolts of the performance, JP, we're 4 points into our Champions League campaign. We're bottom of the group, but we've won double the amount of points that we did last year. I asked the question last night, does it make it a better campaign for you? Double the amount of points? Does that necessarily mean we've had a better campaign?
You put the points tally to one side, so I was at 5. I was in person at 5 out of those 6 games. The only game I wasn't at was Madrid away. So I wasn't out my nut at all the games. I was watching the games with a fairly clear head, and I saw a Celtic team perform in those games. I didn't leave Rotterdam that night thinking, God, we're a million miles off it. I didn't feel that. I didn't feel it after Lazio at home. Certainly didn't feel it after Atletico Madrid at home. And the Lazio game, we were still in it in the 80th minute, and the difference was a remarkable international World Cup winning striker. People might sort of then flip that and go, well, why didn't we didn't have the quality that we should have had? Then we could have won that game in that first 80 minutes, and I take that completely on board. But as a progression in Europe, whilst it might not feel like it, and certainly because we've not qualified for the Europa League or even the Champions League, it still maybe doesn't feel like that. But to me, I would then look to next season I know the format's changing and everything else, and I'm still not sure I fully understand it. But I would then look to next season to be looking to get 6 points or 8 points.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that's
incremental improvements.
I think we've spoken about that before, where that is what we would hope that would happen, and that there's some sort of plan in place that's been put together by the club, and they're not just doing it on the hoof. And I know that a lot of people think that that's probably what they're doing, and maybe it is. I don't know. We're not privy to what goes on inside those walls, but I just think that if you've got a plan, and that is where they see themselves. Well, where do they see themselves in 3 years? Where do they see themselves in 5 years?
Yeah.
And what have we done? I mean, I need to give credit to 67 pins on Twitter, but there's a tweet this morning that got put out. Celtic got more Champions League points than Seville, Union Berlin, Red Star, and Antwerp, and they got the same amount of points as Man United, Young Boys, Salzburg, Benfica, and Braga, and they got one less point than Newcastle. So,
yeah,
whilst reading that is slightly comforting in the terms of and showing where we are in the pool of clubs in Europe, it doesn't satisfy the hunger that everybody has to have done better than that. And knowing that we could have done better than that had we been better equipped going into that particular group that we found ourselves in, I don't think there's any doubt about that. If we'd added players of the quality of Jota and Carter Vickers in whatever positions that were needed, then we probably would have done better. And that's the frustrating thing.
It is because even if you're only talking three players, again, incrementally, you're improving the quality of your squad. We had the conversation the other week there. Which players are you happy with when you go into a Champions League game? Do you think, and I'm not saying they're Champions League class, they're not elite Champions League players who would sign for Real Madrid, JP, but you're happy with them in terms of what we have and going into the games. And the players I think I mentioned at this level that I was more than happy with was Cameron Carter-Vickers, Callum McGregor, Rio Atati, Kyogo Furuhashi, Matt O'Reilly. I had a wee question mark over Alistair Johnson. I thought that this season he hadn't been that great at this level. But I think 5 or 6 players. So every single season, if you're then going for this quality that Brendan keeps talking about, and you complement the 5 or 6, and there's another one, there's 7, 8, and before you know it, you've got a team that you're quite happy going into any game because you know that you're at your maximum on a personal level. Celtic are at the maximum they can possibly be at. If you're going into these games, and we've done it for years, and you're going into the games playing Callum McGregor at left back, or you're going in and you're playing Nir Bitton at centre half, Owen O'Connell at centre half. We've done this. We've gone into a European game with Kundai Benyu playing in midfield. You know, and
we ended up last night with 17? Is he 17? The boy Mitchell Frame.
Mitchell Frame. By the way, loads of credit for him last night. That was brilliant.
I mean, I can't even. He was like 7 the last time we won a Champions League game.
It's like Patrick McGowan. Patrick McGowan last night was talking about it, and he's had a season ticket. JP, he was talking about it on Tuesday. He's had a season ticket for a decade. He's never seen Celtic winning a Champions League game at home, and then it brings it home. I mean, it's incredible to think that somebody like me, Patrick, has for 10 years and he's never seen it. That's the realism of it. And as you say, the last time we won a game, your man Mitchell Frame was 7. Which is astonishing.
When I saw he was coming on last night, I thought it was Thiago Holm initially.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, when they read it out, making his Celtic debut, number 60, can't remember his number, but Mitchell Frame, and I was like, what? We're putting on a kid in this game, and fair play to him. He just got stuck right in, no fear, probably didn't have any time to think about it because he probably was warming up, not expecting to get on, and then obviously circumstances transpire that we need to put on a player in his position, and he gets the nod, and suddenly you're coming on for Celtic to make your debut in the Champions League. I mean, that if he's a Celtic fan, that's surely something that he's been dreaming about since. And it couldn't have dreamt a better scenario than to come on and be involved. I mean, that's for the rest of time. He's in Celtic history. Like, that's it. Yeah. You can't escape that fact. Like, well, no matter what he does, and I hope he goes on to have a good career with us or elsewhere, but he is now a pretty serious footnote in Celtic's European history. As you well know, you know the history better than me, and there's names from the past that will crop up in conversation, be like, all right, I remember, like, spoke of a certain vintage, you'll be like, oh, I remember that guy making his debut that night or whatever.
Yeah.
Speaking of which, when you mentioned Estoril, is Estoril not where the Celtic team stayed ahead of Lisbon? Is that right?
Yeah, you're right. You're spot on.
Because Jock Stein wanted to have them away from like Lisbon, so they were just sort of outside it. Or I think I've heard that once, but
yeah. I love what I mean. Jim Moore was very kind yesterday in giving me, because I'm an absolute geek when it comes to Celtic history, like you say, a big batch of books. And after the game last night, after being on the stream and everything, I'm sitting there just reading through it and just reminding myself how much I love the history. But you're right. I remember there was a time when young Karamoko Dembele came on against Cluj away from home, and he was 16. JP, he was 16 and made his European debut for Celtic. And I remember after that game thinking, wow, I mean, the youngest player that had ever played for Celtic in Europe prior to him was a guy called John McCluskey. And John McCluskey was Georgie's brother. And if you talk to anybody who knew him or seen him playing, apparently he was one of the greatest talents. But he had a very rare blood disorder, and he had to retire from the game very, very young. But he made his debut, and he was the youngest player ever to make his debut. I think he was 17. Karamoko Dembele makes his debut, and he wins that accolade. And then last night, Mitchell Frame, but a good pal of mine was telling me that Mitchell Frame has been at Celtic, JP, for 10 years. He's been at Celtic since he was 7. Now, you imagine for those 10 years, right, all the training sessions, travelling through from home once or twice a week, whatever your commitment is, and going through all the age groups and seeing loads of other players maybe going through and hitting a certain level and then either leaving the club, never getting a game. Every now and again, you see something like the Tierney. It's within that boy's 10-year period that he's seen all that. And last night was his night, and he came on. And you say the thing there, no fear. He did. There's a naivety at times to young players that they don't overthink it. And they go in, and the first thing he did was positive. And then you're thinking, right, you can feel the fans behind him, willing him on, because we criticise the club quite a bit for the youth policy. There's not enough young guys coming through. That was brilliant last night.
And the mad thing is that we see other European teams come to us, and they've got young guys that are like 18 or 19 who are playing with that same freedom. They're obviously very skilled, and that's why they've managed to, get their way into a top European side, and they've been blooded by the coach or whatever. But you do then stop and go, wait a minute, why are they? What's going wrong with our youth setup that we haven't been able to bring guys through? And I really, really hope that that's part of this plan under Brendan Rodgers. Because the other thing is, we're going into next season hopefully as champions, touch wood, and going into the Champions League, and with Brendan Rodgers at the helm. We all wanted Ange Postecoglou mainly to stay to have another crack at the Champions League because he'd had that taste of it in his first season. I think you need to park what's been before with Brendan Rodgers, as much as snide folk like to remind us of his record and the fact that we'd set this unheard of record of being the first British team to go 15 games without a win in the Champions League. Which I'd never heard been mentioned before, funnily enough. But he's got the opportunity to get a second bite at it, but with the experience of this season. So forget everything that he's done before, either with Leicester or with Celtic. It's the here and now, and what he does with this Celtic team going into the next European campaign, and that's what you want to build on. You want to build on this momentum, and what we did last night was a huge step to that, I would have thought.
Listen, there's some performances last night that it wouldn't be right for us to go through without focusing on them, JP, and one of them is big Liam Scales. But I love the fact that when Lagerbielke scored, I don't think it's still Tiger Tim who is on the old music in that at Celtic Park. He got sacked, didn't he, for making a comment about Rangers getting knocked out of Europe. But whoever's on the buttons, I thought they'd done a great job because they played Born Slippy. Would you say it was made famous by Trainspotting? Probably. Born Slippy by Underworld, made famous by Trainspotting.
Yeah, I would argue that. I'm pretty sure I've got the. Have I got it? Yep, there it is. This is. I didn't mean this because they're all the alphabetical order, but there it is. What bought at the time, taken from the film,
single,
taken from the film Trainspotting plus 3 new mixes, and that essentially was my introduction to Underworld. I've seen them 3 times live, and once was at T in the Park when I was watching I think I was watching Coldplay, and it wasn't really doing it for me. I love Coldplay, but for some reason I was just like, we'll go somewhere else. And I said, the Underworld are on at the NME stage, let's go there. And we arrived just as they were playing King of Snake, and the place was just going absolutely bananas. It's one of my favourite T in the Park memories. And I saw them at the Carlin Academy, as it was then, somewhere around 2006 or something like that. And then my first ever night in New York City in 2010, I checked into the hostel that I was staying in for the night because I was travelling to Philadelphia the next day. And I checked in the hostel and I looked up to see what was on, and Underworld were on at the Roseland Ballroom, which is was kind of like the Barras of New York. And I just got a subway, first night in New York, got a subway straight there, bought a ticket off a wee guy outside for $60, and went in and saw Underworld in this amazing ballroom. And they played Born Slippy, and Carol Hyde was just giving it like. When the chord progression came in at the end, he just shouted, "He's like New York City!" And I remember just standing there going, "I'm in New York at a gig. This is unbelievable." And then on the way out, got talking to these Irish guys, Garrett and Decky. Decky was from Derry, and Garrett was from, I think, Dublin. And they two were pals. And they just got talking to them on the way out, and they were like, "What are you doing now?" And I went, "I'm just going to go back to my hostel." And they were like, "No, you're not. You're coming out drinking with us." And they took me to all these bars in Manhattan and had a great night with them. And then we were out in Times Square, and Decky goes, "That's Carol and Rick from Underworld." And they were out taking pictures in Times Square before their bus call. And we went over and said it right to them and got a picture with them and all that. It was unbelievable.
I love it. So from New York to Celtic Park, you've been shouting Lager, Lager, Lager.
I mean, and then I saw them earlier on this year at the Albert Hall. I went down to London to see them at the Albert Hall. They played a Teenage Cancer Trust gig, and what a night that was as well. So to hear that song in Celtic Park, played as an unfancied player who happens to have Lager in his name, scores the winner in the Champions League for the first time, first home victory in 10 years. It was, as songs go to be played, it was pretty special. Yeah.
Remind me, the New York, what was the timeline? What date was that? What year was it, JP?
October 26, 2010. Yeah, October 26, 2010. Felix the House Cat was the warm-up DJ. Unreal. It was proper. I mean, when I went to the bar in that venue, the guy that was serving me looked like Patrick Swayze in Roadhouse. And I said, "Can I get a beer?" And he said, "Yeah." He was like, "Is that Scottish accent you got there?" And I was like, "Yeah." And then he was like, "Ah, man." And then I was like, "It's my first night in New York City." And he was like, "What?" And he got a tequila, poured us a tequila, and we linked arms and shot a tequila together. And he was like, "Welcome to New York City, man." I was like, "Okay." I mean, this is has someone written this for me, because this is wild. Like, that I was experiencing it. It was great.
I love it, and it's linked into last night's game.
I know.
Lager.
Yeah.
But on that note, JP, I spy over your shoulder there an album that, again, I'm going to link it into The Glory and the Dream, which was the Acsom released single a year ago. You can still watch it on the YouTube channel, Raising Cash for St. Mary's, of course. And it was co-written by a gentleman called Gary John Kane, who is brothers of the Kane. He's a brother of the Kane brothers, who were Hue and Cry. And Gary John, of course, is also the bass player of the Proclaimers. But he runs a record label called Button Up, and I've seen him promoting that record behind you on his Facebook. Tell me a wee bit about that. Is that a button-up record or?
It is. It's pals of mine, Tijuana Bibles, fronted by Tony Costello. He'll be delighted that they're getting a mention. They spied it last week and sent me a couple of screenshots saying, "Oh, that's amazing." So yeah, they're playing King Tut's on Saturday night, and my pal Mikey's the drummer as well, and yeah, it's their debut album. They've been about for a while. They've been putting a lot of blood, sweat, and tears into getting that record out, and I know it's something they're immensely proud of, and great band as well. And they're like I said, they're playing Tuts on Saturday night, and I'm not working it. I'm just going to enjoy the show.
Oh, brilliant. Superb. So there you go, Tijuana Bibles. We've linked that into Celtic as well, because the record label is run by Gary John Kane, who is the co-writer of The Glory and the Dream. There you go. Everything links back to Celtic, JP, every time.
Celtic in music, it's whether you like it or not, it's interlinked.
It's intrinsic. Big shout out also to young Derry, who is the nephew of Kevin Graham, and his P6K class at Borestone Primary School, who will be tuning in to a Celtic State of Mind today. How good is that? We're even in the P6s.
We're tuning in. We've kept it PG. Then that's a good thing. That's why you should always not swear.
You're right. Tone it down. Keep it. But it's a different show today, as it might have been if we hadn't got that win last night. It might have been a frustrating show today. But you know what? As you say, JP, if you look at in its entirety, the 6 games, and you look at that performance in Madrid, you can actually say to yourself, listen, it was the same last year in Madrid against Real Madrid, where we got a tanking. The red cards played their part. The Lazio thing, yeah, you're unlucky. But it's moments, and it's moments that Brendan is looking at and focusing on and saying, right, let's do better next time. But in order to do better, we need to do better in the transfer windows as well. AJSC Tech, you'll notice Chris Morris there as well, I'm sure, as JP. Big Scales has looked Champions League quality. I wish people would stop waiting or expecting him to have a big fail, because he isn't an exotic signing with an exotic name. Right, I think it's a brilliant point. I said earlier on, Bernabe, you said he'll probably go on and be a player somewhere else. He'll be successful as a footballer somewhere else. I'm not so sure Bolingoli ever will, but Bernabe might be able to. And Scales falls into that category, JP, that had he left in the summer, let's be honest now, had he left in the summer, we wouldn't have batted an eyelid, right? He has got the games, and he's proved not only to be good enough for Celtic, but he's proved that he's good enough to play in the Champions League for Celtic, not just be there as a passenger. JP, last night he was phenomenal. He got the man of the match.
Aye, and by the way,
turnaround.
And by the way, at no point have I ever been on record saying that I think Liam Scales is going to be the answer at any point in the summer or at any point in the past. I hadn't seen enough of him to completely write him off and just throw him in the scrap heap as a Celtic player. And the noises that I was hearing from Brendan Rodgers after the friendlies were such that he obviously saw something in him, and therefore that made me want to give him the benefit of the doubt. I mean, I think that's happened with quite a few players over the years, where you've heard a manager that you trust talking about a player and going, right, well, okay, if he's prepared to give him a chance, then I don't see why we shouldn't. And then obviously when you see the performance, he played every single Champions League game, I think. I might be wrong.
90 minutes. I think he's played every minute.
Yeah, I mean, you would never have thought that. Nobody would have thought that. But I don't know how you can't be pleased at that, or I don't. People want to draw a line under him as if to say, "Well, all right, thanks for your efforts. Here's a Rolex. You know, see you again. Like come back for a reunion sometime." I just think that I think we should allow him to develop and see what else. I mean, folk will then say, "Oh, he's all the player he will ever be." But he can do a job for Celtic. He can do a job for Celtic. He's proved that. And I thought that tackle earlier on last night set the tone. And one of those ones where if you see a tackle like that from a player, it kind of makes you think, right, that's the mentality of the whole team. Like he's representing the whole team with that tackle. That's what's been drilled into them before they go onto the pitch, to just leave everything out there and not give an inch, and he did that. And I was really, really pleased for him. Like I said earlier.
It sets a tone. But you're talking about mentality. It does, because if you're on that park and you're maybe like playing within yourself, I'm glad I said that, right? Playing within yourself, or and hiding, and it can be done even on a stage like that that's live. You can do it. You can shout for a ball with a defender in front of you, and it looks like you're shown for it, but you're not really shown for it. And if somebody steps up to the plate, and I think McGregor done it as well. McGregor was outstanding for me. He was brilliant. He was getting some stick in the comments last night. I thought Callum McGregor was outstanding.
I don't know if he was outstanding. I don't know if I'd agree with that.
As a captain, JP, he was actually in his own players' faces. Every time there was a lull in proceedings, he done it with Kyogo. Palmer. He had a right go at Palmer. I just felt that he grabbed the Celtic team by the scruff of the neck. Maybe outstanding as a captain rather than silky football. I just thought he was absolutely pivotal last night, McGregor.
Well, ultimately, to win a game 2-1, you're not going to have 4s or 5s out of 10 across the park. To me, Callum McGregor last night was a 7 out of 10. I thought it was good without being outstanding. But the Matt O'Reilly touch and cross for the goal, I mean, to bring the ball down like that and to have the composure to then dink it absolutely inch perfect. Lagerbielke couldn't have missed. If he had done,
maybe Lager, but we're still
no, I'm trying to think of another Underworld song that they could have played, but no, it was an amazing moment, and he's performing at Champions League level. He's got a number of ticks next to his name. He's not scored, admittedly, but assists are there, performances are there, praise from opposition managers are there. It's great to see, and I really do hope that he stays till the end of the season at least.
At the very, you said something really interesting. I felt there. The touch was sublime. It was brilliant, absolutely right. And this isn't an opportunity for me to have a dig at Mikey Johnson. I've seen Mikey Johnson having a great touch. It was the second bit I was just as impressed by the composure, JP, to then do that. The second part, which is actually to look up and find your man, and that there is key, because the touch was excellent, absolutely brilliant. But he actually then made a defining pass that won us a game. I'm going to bring this up because I know it'll appeal to you as well, JP. This is from Robbie, who, as well as bringing this to our attention, which is phenomenal, he's also supporting the channel. So thanks for that, Robbie. On a different note, we'd like to thank all fellow CSC supporters that made it to the Shane MacGowan funeral last week. How do you pronounce that now? Is that Nena?
Thanks, Nena.
Sorry if I pronounced that incorrectly. It was magnificent. Shane was our club president. How phenomenal is that? Regards, Robbie Bonfield, Brian Hogan, CSC, Tipperary. That's phenomenal. By the way, I would implore anybody to watch some of the footage from this funeral. And normally the tears at the funeral are for a certain reason. But see the emotional element, watching Nick Cave, for example, or watching the Fairy Tale in New York. Unbelievable.
Glenn Hansard's playing a gig next year, and it was supposed to be in St. Luke's, but it's been moved up to the Pavilion. I think there's going to be more tickets available tomorrow, which would probably be worth going to. But I know you're right that the funeral was pretty incredible. I mean, it was marking a fairly significant person in history. I mean, he'll be remembered. Like, he's written songs that will be remembered forever, long after we're gone as well. Shane MacGowan will be lauded in Irish history. There's absolutely no doubt about that. And I was speaking to my pal Jamie, who actually sold me a Christmas tree over to my right the other day, and we were talking about Shane MacGowan, and he said that he's never been affected as much by an artist's passing as he was with Shane MacGowan's. And I said, "Oh, were you a big fan?" He went, "Aye." And I said, "You see them live?" He went, "Aye, about 10 times live." And I went, "What? You seen them 10 times? Seen them at Brixton Academy? Seen them Tea in the Park, numerous Glasgow academies as well." And very, very envious. So I would have loved to have just seen them once, just once. But won't happen now. But yeah,
listen, this is an amazing message to get from Robbie. Thank you very much for sharing this with us, Robbie. I mean, Shane MacGowan, it's one of the ones, JP, growing up, kind of the Pogues were a band that my dad liked, you know, so it was omnipresent. Everybody knows the Fairy Tale of New York, but there's other moments, and obviously since he's passing, you've probably dug in a wee bit deeper, as you certainly do. But one song that I love of Shane MacGowan's was with Sinead O'Connor, Haunted. I think it's a sensational song, and of course we've lost both of them in the last 12 months, Sinead O'Connor and Shane MacGowan. But one wee story, I'm going to throw it out there, and again it goes back to me being an absolute history geek when it comes to Celtic, JP. The Lord of the Wing, for me, is the best documentary. Yeah, the best documentary ever made on Celtic, right? And I think it was so good because it was a director called James Dornan, I think that's his name, who normally did war documentaries, JP. So he was approaching this from a completely different angle. It wasn't like a dyed-in-the-wool kind of Celtic fan whose emotional element would maybe take over a wee bit. And that was the documentary that gave us that moment where wee Jinky goes into the recording studio with Jim Kerr and they record Dirty Old Town, right? We've all seen the footage, but the documentary is amazing. I've got it on DVD. I think it's on YouTube, actually. And what happened was, and I only have experience of this because I worked on the Neely Mocking doc, is that you film, like, I'm talking loads and loads of footage. For example, Neely Mocking, we interviewed 50 people for that, right? And we interviewed every single one of them for an hour. And the finished documentary is maybe an hour and a half long. So you've got loads and loads of unseen footage when you do something like this. And it was the same with Lord of the Wing. And the reason I'm saying it is because Shane MacGowan committed an interview to that documentary, which was never included in the final cut. Not only that, the full interview, that is, not only that, he played, I think, 2 songs, maybe 3 songs that he had written. And one of them was about Jinky and another one was about Celtic. And he played them acoustically, and it was all filmed, but none of that footage was used in the documentary, JP. But it does exist, and I know who's got it. I know who's got the footage.
How much are you going to bribe them with to get it off them? By the way,
it needs to be seen. It needs to be seen.
Like, if you're a Celtic fan of a particular vintage, i.e., mine and yours, Fiesta by the Pogues is a song that you even if you didn't know that that's what it was called, as soon as you hear the first few bars of that song, you're like, that's Celtic Park, that's Stan Petrov scoring, that's
synonymous. Absolutely.
It was brilliant that it's now, it is synonymous, like you say, it is synonymous with a Celtic goal at Celtic Park in the sunshine, you know, like in the kind of early noughties sunshine. That's what I think of when I hear it, anyway, for sure.
Oh, it's phenomenal. By the way, I've put it out there. It does exist. I'm now going to have to find a way to share it.
You'll find a way. We'll find a way.
We'll find a way, JP. Listen, I've really enjoyed that. And like you say, a completely different show than it would have been had we not got the result. But I'm delighted we did. The monkeys off the back. Let's build a bit of momentum for the big game. Every game's big, obviously, but the big one on the 30th of December, let's build some momentum for that. We're going to be streaming every single day, covering every game in between, of course, right through the Christmas and New Year period. We won't miss a beat. I might not have a contributor to join me, but I'll certainly be on the show. Might take Christmas Day off. Put the Pogues on and eat and drink and be merry. So thank you, everybody, for getting involved. Thank you to Robbie. I really appreciate that. Super big shout out to the Brian Hogan CSC in Tipperary, of course. And thank you to JP Mason for joining me on A Celtic State of Mind.
Cheers, Paul.